What's up, outliers? Welcome to Performance Bites for bite sized insights into complex subjects in health and performance. Today, we're going to break down electrolytes, which we have done an episode on just electrolytes themselves. But today, we're actually going to look at different brands of electrolytes and kind of give them a ranking system from least best to the best. And this is a little bit subjective. This is going to be to my opinion, but also just based upon the ingredients and the quality of those ingredients, along with the bioavailability of the electrolytes being those minerals that our body needs to function at the highest level possible. So, to start that off, we need to kind of look at the different electrolytes and then break down the common types that are inside most of these electrolytes that we can go purchase at the store, purchase online, and put into our drinks and use for performance. So, when we're talking about electrolytes, we're talking about minerals that we can get from fruits, vegetables, meats, natural whole foods, whatever the case be. But sometimes we're not getting quite the amount that we need. So, when we're looking at this and we're talking about electrolytes, the most common one's going to be sodium, which you get from different types of salts. Then we're going to have potassium, magnesium, calcium, chloride, and iodine. So these are the electrolytes that we're kind of looking at. But when we're looking at the supplement style of electrolytes and these different powders and stuff, typically we're going to just be looking at sodium, potassium, magnesium, sometimes calcium, but not very common because we get plenty of calcium in our normal nutrition if we're eating pretty well and getting adequate amounts of whole foods. We're usually not too worried about calcium. Now, of course, there are people that deal with deficiencies in calcium. That's a whole other story. But for the sake of the episode, we're going to stick with the three big ones, which are going to be sodium, potassium, and magnesium. So let's start with sodium. So when we're talking about sodium, we can look at the periodic table. We'll see that as Na, which stands for natremia, which is actually what sodium is on the scientific level, blah, 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 blah. But we'll continue to refer to it as sodium and or salt interchangeably throughout this episode. So when we look at sodium, we can look at it from a place of sea salt, pink Himalayan salt, real salt, table salt, and have all these different types of salts that are out there. Now, when we talk about table salt, we're talking about sodium chloride, which is a more refined processed sodium that we would see in like the Mordens and stuff like that brands. And there's nothing inherently wrong about it per se. It does have a little bit higher amounts of sodium to the chloride ratio. But when we're looking at the extra minerals that we can obtain through like pink Himalayan sea salt or through real salt, which is Redmond's brand coming out of an ancient seabed in Utah, we can see these different types of salts and stuff and kind of go, okay, one's a little bit more processed, one is a little bit more natural in its state, and is also going to carry extra minerals. So, like pink Himalayan sea salt is known to have extra trace minerals in it, which is why it actually has the color it has, which is that pinkish color, because there's other minerals that create that color, copper being one of them, iron being another one. And we say trace minerals because the amount that you're actually getting from them is very low. The majority of these salts are still just sodium chloride, which is going to be roughly like 97 to 98% of its existence. But within it, we get the micro amounts of other trace minerals, which is cool. And also still good for the body to get those trace minerals, especially when we're looking at that pink Himalayan sea salt and then also the Redmond's real salt coming from sources of land in old ancient seabeds. Now, sea salt, awesome, wonderful. There's a lot of great minerals that also come along in the sea salt. We just have to take into account the how clean those sea salts might be because, well, to be frank, our oceans aren't necessarily the cleanest that they've ever been in the existence of this world. So we want to just take that into account and kind of look at what might be coming along in those. But sea salt is definitely going to provide more extra minerals than your table salt. But then at the same time, we can look at the color of these different salts and kind of see that there's more minerals going on in there. So, as far as like the bioavailability and whatnot, They're all going to be pretty much the same because sodium is pretty bioavailable. The body really, really actually needs a lot of sodium to function at a high level. And we also lose a lot of sodium in our sweat, which we don't need to be like perspirating and covered in sweat to actually be losing that sodium. We also lose a lot of it through urination, and we also sweat without really like beating up because our body is trying to essentially cool down. So we can sweat depending upon the climate. Here, I'm in a high desert climate, so sweat doesn't last very long on the skin. It'll actually evaporate off, which is more of the idea to cool the body down. Meanwhile, if you're down in more like Florida or something like that, high humidity, you might sweat and it might stay on you, which then makes it even harder to stay hydrated, makes it even harder to actually cool the body down. But when it comes to this, we can lose a lot of sodium through sweat. We can lose a lot of sodium through even speaking. Our feet sweat constantly. That's a very common thing we don't really take into account. And also just overall existence of the processes in the body and urination and stuff like that, like I said. So we can lose a lot of sodium. So we don't want to be too afraid of consumption of sodium as long as we're also getting potassium, which is going to be what we're going to break into next. First, we have potassium citrate, which is a fairly high availability, bioavailability. So we'll absorb that fairly well. Uh, Pretty gentle on the stomach, easy to take in. Meanwhile, like a potassium chloride, it's a little bit cheaper, usually just a little bit less bioavailable. So a lot of products tend to use the potassium chloride, which is just going to be potassium mixed with a chloride attached to it to basically preserve that potassium. And it's pretty common, it's effective, it's good. There's nothing really wrong with it. So the least bioavailable potassium is going to be potassium gluconate. It's still fine. It's just not going to get uptaken into the system quite the same as the citrate or the chloride. So we just want to kind of look at that when we look at products sometimes and be like, okay, what version of the potassium am I getting? If I'm drinking, this electrolyte and it has a gluconate in it, I can kind of assume that I'm not going to get as much of it into my system, or I'm going to see an even higher amount of it in that electrolyte blend compared to maybe if I'm looking at a potassium, say like the potassium chloride, I might see 300 milligrams of that in something. Meanwhile, I might see 600 milligrams of the gluconate, and that is essentially making up for the loss when we don't absorb it as much. So it might say 600, but you might not actually be absorbing all of that 600. So it's the little nuances sometimes to understand when we're looking at these things that make a big difference, especially when we're reading labels and learning how to actually understand what these labels mean. Now, when we talk about magnesium, we usually associate it with a couple things. Relaxation being one, and the other being like Epsom salt baths. So that's important to take note because we'll kind of get into the type of magnesium that Epsom salt is and what it does compared to what some of the other ones do. So compared to what some of the other ones do. So, magnesium glycinate is going to be one of the better ones. It's a bit expensive compared to, say, like the malate or the chloride or the oxide. And that's why brands will use certain ones. At the end of the day, is they're looking at profit margins. Of course, that's a business, so they have to take that into account. But if a glycinate exists, that's going to be one of the better ones. It can have a pretty good calming effect for recovery. It also can help with muscular cramps and stuff like that. But we don't see it very often in the blends of electrolytes that we would see on the shelves and stuff like that. But it is common to see a malate. So a malate, high absorption, just like the glycinate, but a little bit cheaper, easier to put into products and have out there. And the big thing with this is magnesium is a super, super important mineral in our body. About two-thirds of the population here in the US are deficient or close to deficient in magnesium. And that's not because people aren't trying to eat whole foods and do that stuff, but our soils, unfortunately, are void of that nutrition just from over-tilling, spraying, and stuff like that. So there's a big chunk of people that actually don't get enough magnesium. Now, we usually don't see huge, huge doses of magnesium in electrolytes. We'll see maybe anywhere from 60 to 100 milligrams, and that's still actually a fairly low dose. When we look at some of the supplements, call it like Magnesium Breakthrough, those get up to like 250 milligrams to 500 milligrams per serving. A lot more magnesium in that than our electrolytes, but different function and purpose, of course. So when we look at like a citrate with the magnesium, it's fine. Absorption is just a little bit lower. And that is actually going to be the one that is commonly used to, and no better way of saying this, pass things through your system so that it comes out the other side. So it's a laxative. So we got to be a little bit careful when we look at that citrate with magnesium citrate because too much of it could cause stomach issues. And in the grand scheme of it, if you get loose stool, you are in a state of dehydration rather than rehydration. So we want to kind of pay attention to that fact that that can happen. And, you're probably drinking it in hopes to create a better hydration level in your body, and the result could actually be more dehydration. So just something to kind of take into account, but it is used a lot, and typically it's used at low amounts. Not common for it to happen, but everybody has different sensitivities. But if it does happen, maybe just switch brands to one that's more of like a malate. All right. So now that we've gone over those three big electrolytes and the different types, let's look at a ranking system essentially of these electrolytes and which brands are great, which brands maybe aren't so great. To start it off, we're just going to say Gatorade's the lowest. We talk about that as an electrolyte drink or a sports drink, but it's more of a sports drink because of the sugar, which actually is totally fine. Certain situations are going to be okay to have some of that sugar, especially if you're a high endurance athlete and you need to replenish blood sugar and glycogen and stuff like that. So there's nuance to these things, but we're only going to see 110 milligrams of sodium, not very much, 30 milligrams of potassium, and trace amounts of magnesium. So very low amounts of electrolytes actually in there. Body armor, about the same thing. We're not really seeing very much. At least it has some coconut water in it that can help with hydration. Lower sugar, but still has the sugar in it. And then a very, very popular electrolyte drink because it is in stores. It's all over the place. It's in Costco and stuff like that is Liquid IV. So Liquid IV has about 500 milligrams of sodium. That's a good amount of sodium. 370 milligrams of potassium and little to no magnesium. Something to take in consideration when we look at liquid IVs, though, is that there is so much more sugar than anything else in them. The first two ingredients are just two different types of sugar. So, if you're not really looking for like a sugar boost, liquid IV might not be the thing for you, but it does have a fair amount of electrolytes, but the quality of those electrolytes are actually lower as well. Next is Gnarly Hydrate. I've seen a lot of ads for this. Their marketing's actually pretty good. But 250 milligrams of sodium, 100 milligrams of potassium, 80 milligrams of magnesium. It's a fine blend. I would like to see a little more sodium in that. And it does have some sugar to it, which is not a huge deal. Once again, like I said, it is only 4 grams compared to like a Gatorade where you're going to get like a high amount. So it's not too bad. It does have sweetener in it, being the stevia. So not the worst thing ever. I don't think that would be one that I would personally pick just because I would like to see a little bit more of that sodium and also like low amounts of sweetener. I don't mind sugar. I would rather sugar over sweetener at the end of the day personally, but that's my personal take. The next one is Noon. So Noon, it's funny, is actually the first like electrolyte tablet that I've ever used back when I was competing in obstacle course racing. That was like my go-to electrolyte. So 300 milligrams of sodium, 150 milligrams of potassium, and 25 on the magnesium. A little bit of sugar, a little bit of stevia, pretty balanced. Not the worst thing ever, give or take. I would just once again like to see more electrolyte actually in there. Is it going to help you stay hydrated? Absolutely, because if you put one of those tablets in water, it's going to taste, berry bullshit, whatever, and it's going to make you drink it, which is going to be better than not. Now, the next one is Redmond's Relight. Big fan of this one because Redmond, I talked about that sodium coming from a ancient seabed in Utah, so that quality is pretty high. We get some trace minerals, which is super good. They're about 500, 800 milligrams. There's a couple of different versions that they have of sodium, so pretty high. 370 on the potassium, great number, also a little bit higher. And then 50 to 60 on the magnesium. And they use stevia and monk fruit, both calorically lists sweeteners, but still pretty good. It also has coconut water, and its salt, like I said, is coming from basically old seabeds, so pretty good high quality salt. Then next would be the element, which is good. And I'm gonna put next and element kind of in the same category together because for one, I'm biased on next because I created the formula for it, pick the ingredients for a certain reason. So kind of break that down. But element's pretty good. 1,000 milligrams of sodium. It's a lot of sodium. Not everybody needs it. One thing I'm not a big fan of with element, which is why Derek Kelly and I created next, is because element is a little bit too yummy. It's like, what I call, like, a little kid's palate. It's for people that like that sort of stuff, the raspberry, the watermelons, and stuff like that. Fine, whatever. However, just important to note that those things can be a little bit misleading sometimes in the way that they're helping you. Just I'm not gonna go too much into that, but that 1,000 milligrams of or 1 gram of sodium is great. It's from table salt, so it's a cheaper version for them to use, high sodium. They don't have to use as much of it to get that sodium count from the salt, but I'm not as big a fan of the table salt. I just don't really find it to be very settling. Also can taste overly salty, so depending upon the person. I did when I first started drinking electrolytes and I switched to Element, it was a pretty salty drink, and what has happened is they've changed a lot of things. They've increased their sweeteners, they've changed their flavors, so it really hides that saltiness, but now it's almost like a nappy syrup that you get in your mouth. You almost have to put it in, like, 32 ounces of water to, like, even get it down because it's just too much. Not the worst thing ever. Uses stevia for sweetener, no carbs, all that stuff. Great, awesome. But like I said, I'm gonna be very biased because of creating Next and using pink Himalayan sea salt, so high quality salt, using magnesium malate, high quality magnesium, potassium chloride, which is going to be a fairly bioavailable version of potassium. So 800 milligrams sodium, 300 milligrams of potassium, and 60 milligrams of magnesium. That was formulated to try and mimic sweat loss and what we're basically losing during activity within an hour's time. So everyone's a little bit different at their sweat race, but it's not uncommon if you're doing high level of activity and perspirating, they're going to lose a lot of sodium within that hour time. Done some testing on it. We've seen some high numbers and stuff. So, yeah, that's kind of the order that I put them in. Obviously, like I said, a little bit of a biasy, but at the end of the day, I think something like Next, something like Element, something like Relight, I'm always gonna come back to those ones as the ones that I would kinda refer people to over, say, like, the liquid IVs and stuff like that. I think at least getting high amounts of those electrolytes in is gonna be better, and you can always do half scoops or half servings as well if you need to adjust, but at the end of the day, having something over nothing is going to help. So if liquid IV is what you have in your bag and you have nothing else, so be it. That's gonna be better than, being dehydrated or running out of electrolytes and getting brain fog and stuff like that. So whatever works, but yeah, that's kind of the ranking that I wanna stick with and I feel good about because being something that really helps elevate performance and keeps us healthy is those electrolytes. Basically, the thing that sends electricity with the nervous system to the muscles and the brain. So pretty darn important. I would be really curious if anyone has any brands that they like and would like to have broken down. So if that's the case, drop them in the comments. We can go over them. And then also just ask any questions. I'm always open to it. I love making stuff like this. So if you're curious about more brands, do mention them, reach out to me, message me, whatever the case be. But if you made this far, thanks so much for watching, listening. Please like, subscribe, comment, share, all that great stuff so this information can get out, and I'll catch you in the next one.